everybody. I'm Todd Fahey, the State Director of AARP, and it is our pleasure to work with the Concord Chamber. We have about 230,000 members, people over 50 in New Hampshire, although you need to be over 50 to join AARP, just to make sure everybody knows that. We are an advocacy organization. We're very focused on voter education. This is a key time for us to be able to have our issues discussed and raised with the candidates. You can hear firsthand. So we're really honored to work with the Concord Chamber. As my good friend Tim said, it's a great, impactful organization. So the marriage of our organizations to bring together this event is really an honor for us. And very happy to have Scott Spradling here. He's a familiar face to some of you. He's an Emmy Award-winning former reporter, anchor, and political director for WMUR. He's no stranger to all things political. He's a fine moderator, and I'll turn it over to Scott, and also just make note that I'm very grateful that the candidates have chosen to appear this morning. So Scott, it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. Great to see a packed house. First and foremost, can you hear me all right? Is everything okay? Great. Let me quickly just sort of go through what you can expect this morning. I'll introduce our two fabulous candidates. They will come up, offer up opening statements, and then I would like to reintroduce Tim Sink from the Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce and Roger DeRozier, who is the chair of AARP's Capital City Task Force. These two gentlemen will take point on the first half of our program. They have questions that have been pre-vetted that will be ranging on priorities for AARP as well as economic priorities facing businesses here in Greater Concord. They will alternate back and forth in the questions. I will also have alternating first answers between the two candidates after they give their opening statements. And then we'll transition into questions that will come from all of you. Once again, as a reminder, pens are on the table. There are pads of paper. Please feel free to jot down a question. Just hold up the white sheet of paper. We have folks that will work the room, grab them from you, and we will collect them. And for the second half of our presentation, those questions, I will read them, again, give each candidate a chance to answer those questions, and then we'll just move to closing statements, and then all of you will be fed lunch. So it's a happy ending no matter what the heck happens this morning, right? So thank you all very much again for being here. It is now my honor to first introduce Congresswoman Ann McLean Kuster.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now I'll have Annie sit here while I talk about her. So just smile at her and she'll smile back at you. Ann McLean Kuster was first elected to the House of Representatives to represent New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District in 2012. Annie served as a longtime community activist and adoption attorney who focused her career on Granite State families. Annie graduated from Dartmouth College in 1978 as part of the college's 3rd class that included women students. She later earned her law degree from Georgetown. Born and raised in Concord, Annie's late mom, former state senator Susan McLean, was a pioneer for women in New Hampshire politics. Her late father, Malcolm McLean, was the mayor of Concord and a New Hampshire executive counselor. Annie and her husband, Brad, an environmental lawyer, now live nearby in Hopkinton, where they raised their 2 sons, Zach and Travis. Annie, thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's also now my pleasure to introduce candidate Steve Negron. Now we'll do the same thing. He'll smile at you, you smile at him, and I'll talk about him for a minute. Since 1979, Steve Negron has been answering the call to duty in both private and public sectors. A retired Air Force officer, Steve started his own small business, building on his expertise as a leader in the defense industry. In 2001, he became the youngest corporate business development office manager with Lockheed Martin Corporation, where he helped ID and capture over $7 billion of opportunities in the greater Boston area. Aside from representing Nashua in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, Steve is an active community leader in his church, the local business community, and in youth athletics. Steve graduated in 1983 from Texas Christian University with a BS in criminal justice and received an MBA from Western New England College in 1996. Steve and his wife Terry have lived in Nashua for 28 years, and they have 3 children. Steve, thank you very much for joining us, sir. I take note that both of these candidates for office in the 2nd Congressional District are already office holders and have given a lot to their communities in public service. So on behalf of the Chamber and AARP, thank you both for your service, and thank you both for being here this morning. We did a coin flip this morning to determine who would be first word and last word on opening statements, and by that flip, Congresswoman Kuster, you may have the first word for opening statement.
thank you, Scott. And oh, I probably shouldn't have both of these on at once.
You can actually stand up front
Oh, got it. I'll do it here.
We're user-friendly here.
We're user-friendly. Everybody can hear? Great. Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you to AARP and to the Concord Chamber of Commerce, and thank you to Mr. Negron for being with us today. I want to start by thanking the terrific staff that are going to serve you a wonderful lunch, and we're delighted to have everybody in Concord. I feel at home, my hometown, and it's really great to be back for another debate and discussion about all these important issues, about seniors, about health care, about our economy and growing jobs, and having really terrific pathways for people to find their future here in New Hampshire. We've got an aging demographic, which can be a fine thing, a lot of wisdom, and a lot of opportunity. I meet people all the time moving here to retire or retiring in place. But we also have young people, and we need to be thinking about how we can attract them to stay, work, and play right here in New Hampshire. So I've got a lot of plans and ideas. I've done a lot of work, and I'll look forward to talking about it today. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for your time. And as the lovely and talented Tim Sink delivers the ice water to our candidates, thank you for that, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Representative Negron, it is your time for an opening statement. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming out on a wonderful sunny day in the fall here in New Hampshire. And it's a pleasure and an honor to share the stage with Congresswoman Kuster. But look, we know that this is an important topic, and so thank you for AARP and the Concord Chamber to allow us up here to have a good and honest dialogue, to be able to discuss situations and issues that are important to all of us. And so I'm looking forward to it. You know, as we go through, we always hear there's a lot of issues and concerns, and that's what we're supposed to do as representatives. As my grandmother used to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and that's just because you're supposed to listen, because when you're talking, you're not learning. And so I think this is a great opportunity for both of us to sit and listen and to find out those issues that are out there and have some good, honest dialogue, so I'm looking forward to that. It's a pleasure to be up here, and I want to just recognize that my wife, who's always with me on the campaign trail, is here again, so thank you, Terry, for being here. I just realized that if I'm fortunate enough to move on in November, that I will be a fighter for you and for everything that's important to you. And I'd just like to say in Spanish, if I may, a todos los ancianos que están escuchando, que yo siempre lucharé por tus beneficios. Muchísimas gracias. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And welcome again to both of you.
Thank you.
So we'll move now to the panelist questions. The format will be very simple here. We'll start with Roger DeRozier from AARP. We'll ask a question first to Congresswoman Kuster. She will have a minute. Mr. Negron will have a minute on the same answer. And then if there is a need for follow-up, we'll do it in 30-second increments. Okay. As a reminder to our candidates, we have the lovely and talented members of our Chamber of Commerce over here. And so we have some signals to give you for time. And sure. I'll only step in if things are running a little bit too long. We'd like this to be conversational, but we are also trying to make sure that there's some balance in time. So Roger, first question to Congresswoman Kuster.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My first question relates to prescription drugs. According to the AARP Public Policy Institute, in 2015, retail prices for more than 750 prescription drugs commonly used by older adults increased by an average of 6.4%, more than 50 times higher than the general inflation rate of 0.1%. No one should have to choose between buying food and taking their medicine. Do you agree drug prices are too high? And if so, how specifically will you work to lower prescription drug prices and reduce costs for Americans?
So absolutely, yes, I agree drug prices are too high, and I think it's criminal, the drug prices that seniors are asked to pay. 2 pieces of this. One is my own background, having helped to create the medication bridge program that's still in place here in New Hampshire. We put it together about 20 years ago with all of the hospitals participating so that seniors and anyone else who couldn't afford medication could go to the hospital and they would help them tap into the patient assistance programs that are out there. As to the current situation, I think it was a crime that during the Bush administration, they did not impose volume discount negotiation on the Medicare Part D program. Frankly, I think the pharmaceutical industry was too powerful at the time, and I'm going to fight hard, and it's one of the things when Democrats take back the House in January, that'll be one of the first things we'll do, is make sure we have volume discounts for seniors in the Medicare Part D program.
Ms. Kuster, thank you. Mr. Negron.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we have to open up Medicaid Part D to be able to then negotiate lower prices. I think this goes back to what we see right now in Washington, that it's just so large and so bureaucratic that this is a net result of that inefficiency. I think when you look at the FDA and all the things that they impose on the pharmas, and I'm sure Congresswoman Kuster knows because she was a lobbyist for the pharmas, you know, is that you have to be able to do those things that are efficient. You know, you look at same drugs or like drugs for generics that can come overseas. We should allow those to be able to come into the states as long as it pass whatever the safety protocols are. But that's a part of what legislative needs to happen. I think that's part of what Congress needs to make sure, that we level the playing field, that we make sure that for the seniors that we have them give access to the right amount of medication at the right cost. And I think when we can go ahead and become more efficient, I think that's going to be beneficial for everybody.
Thank you both. Let's move now to Tim Singh with a question that can be directed to Mr. Negron.
Yes, but a little bit of housekeeping first. In case you're wondering about lunch, I should have mentioned this earlier. There will be a buffet lunch served at the conclusion of this program at 12:30, so we will not send you out of here hungry. Mr. Negron, attracting and retaining talent remains one of the biggest challenges for employers in this current low unemployment environment. The cost of rental housing is one of the main barriers when it comes to attracting young professionals who are often already saddled with significant college debt. Vacancy rates are historically low, prices are historically high. What can be done to provide housing options that young professionals can afford so we can keep a strong workforce here?
Well, that's a great question, Tim, and thank you for that. I mean, let's tackle this in two parts. The first part is, how do we maintain the greatest talent that we have, and that's our students that are graduating? How do we keep them here in the state? As a small business owner, I can tell you that we have to lash up with universities to provide programs that allow students to stay within this state. My company does a lot of engineering work, and I would love to be able to have a program that allows them to work off some student loan debt as part and parcel of my company. I believe that's an opportunity that has worked well in other states, and we need to look at that here. And to allow them to keep more of the money that they're making. And, you know, the student debt, I have a young daughter that's a sophomore in college, and she's facing the same thing as well. So we have to be able to look at some sort of situations within this state that allows them to, A, number one, stay, B, number two, keep some of their money so they're not always paying debt, to be able to allow them to go ahead and start families in here and remain in the state.
Thank you. Ms. Kuster.
Well, I agree, and I was shocked when the Trump administration tried to get rid of those programs, particularly the relief of student debt for people coming to serve in low-income areas, in health practices. So I was very surprised at that. Look, we've got to tackle the issue of housing in New Hampshire. We don't have enough, and we don't have enough lower-income housing, and so it's very hard for young people to get started here. One thing that's happening right here in Concord and in towns all across, in Franklin and other towns, is helping young people to get started in housing that we didn't consider. Closer to town, downtown, walkable housing. If you go to Manchester now, it's just booming, and I think that's what we need to do. Also, I think it's important to lift the restrictions and let more people live together, and even the restriction of being able to build something in your yard for what we used to call a mother-in-law, what now might be having a young person live nearby.
As a follow-up to the two of you, Tim's question also mentioned that sort of heavy burden of college debt.
Absolutely.
And we know in New Hampshire that is a challenge for young people who are coming through college, trying to stay in New Hampshire, start their families, begin their lives. Do either of you have any approach or ideas for how we can help young people try to sidestep this college debt, whether it's making college more affordable, whether it's helping with financing? What steps do we need to take? Ms. Kuster.
Absolutely. So number one, people should be able to refinance their debt. They can refinance their housing mortgage, they can refinance their car loan, but right now they can't refinance their debt at the lowest possible rates. I've always voted for that. The lowest rates for Pell Grants, the lowest rates for refinancing. Number two, we need pathways, and this is where I've been very focused in the last few years, pathways for people that might not be a four-year college right off the bat, to use our career and technical high schools. Our two-year community colleges have fantastic programs, and then maybe over time they'll go back to school and grow that career. but we need a pathway that's affordable so that they're not so saddled with debt. And New Hampshire is beginning to offer those programs, and a lot of the federal funding that we're bringing in has to do with that.
Mr. Negron.
Sure, absolutely. I don't know when it happened in this country, but you know, there was a time that I remember that a tradesperson had a great job and could make a great living and didn't have to go to a four-year institution. Somewhere along the line, we looked at people and we said, you know, being a plumber, being an electrician, being a carpenter was not as sexy and as attractive as some four-year college degree and some parchment that we put on our wall and we never look at it again. So I believe we need to get back to a point that it is an opportunity for young men and women to get into the trades, to give them the opportunities to get into the trades. It's a great way to make a living. I had a lot of family members that were in the trade practice, and I think we need to somehow make sure that this country has an opportunity to allow those trades, help them federally funded, help some of these schools get started, and get some of those people. And I think that'll attract a lot of folks here in the state and keep them here.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to Roger, a question from AARP, and you can direct it first to Mr. Negron.
Okay. My next question is Social Security. There are nearly 300,000 Granite Staters who receive Social Security benefits. Of these, just over 200,000 are retirees who on average receive about $1,300 per month. Americans work hard and pay into Social Security with every paycheck. We must keep Social Security strong so current and future generations get the benefits they've earned. If nothing is done to update Social Security, across-the-board cuts of nearly 25% could occur in 2034. So, how would you update and strengthen Social Security for current and future generations?
That's a great question. I think that's something that is on everybody's mind that's in this room. Look, Social Security started back in 1935. And if you go all the way back to 1945, 42 workers were providing that benefit for every one retiree. Just go to 1950 and that number dropped to 16. You look at now and it's about 2.5 to 3 people working for every retiree. It's unsustainable. And we need to realize, my grandmother used to say, you know what, you only have so many gazintas and so many gazadas. And right now there's a lot of gazadas and very little gazintas. So we need to fundamentally look how we're going to make sure that we keep this program solvent because it's a benefit earned. Just like for military veterans, it's something that they earn. We owe it to the folks that use it. And so I would do everything in my power to make sure that we find a way to make it work for everybody and not have them fearful that somebody's going to take it away from them.
Ms. Kuster.
And there's good reason to be fearful that somebody's trying to take it away from them because that's the Republican position. And Eddie Edwards just said yesterday he wants to wean people off Social Security in the 1st District. So I want to keep Social Security and I want to keep it strong, and it's not even difficult. We can raise the level of the withholding, which is currently at about $118,000. Above that, no more money is withheld. So anyone that makes $218,000, $318,000, $418,000, all what's coming out of your paycheck is the same, and that's not right. And there's a number out there based upon the demographics, based upon the computation, where it will be sustainable indefinitely. So we need to look at that, raise that cap, and we need to stop talking about weaning people off Social Security because you paid in and you should get your benefits out.
Mr. Negron, a chance for follow-up?
Sure, you know, and that's a great talking point, but we know now, whether it's OMB or CBO, that this will go bankrupt by 2032. So something has to be done, and we've had, you know, 6 years under Congresswoman Kuster to do some things, and we haven't seen that. And so we have to absolutely take a hard stance on this and do something because we can talk about it and we can blame one party or the other. At the end of the day, this is really party agnostic, and this is really about making sure that you keep the benefit that you earned.
I'd just say it's not party agnostic when you drive up the deficit and the debt the way the Republican Party has with this tax giveaway to the wealthiest Americans. And the next step is going to be take away Social Security, take away Medicare, and that's why Mr. Negron had said it's not a retirement program. It is a retirement program. You paid in, you deserve to get your benefits out.
Thank you both for the exchange.
Absolutely.
Let's go now to Tim for a question that can be directed to the Congresswoman first.
So New Hampshire's energy costs are among the highest in the nation. And with power plants retiring throughout New England, some experts are warning that we are reaching a critical point in terms of being able to generate sufficient energy to meet peak demand periods. And the high cost is preventing manufacturers and other high energy users from locating or expanding their operations in New Hampshire. So what ideas do you have to address this issue? And as part of your answer, could you comment specifically on a couple of proposed projects, Granite Bridges, the pipeline, and also Northern Pass?
So let me start by saying there is a win-win-win, not just for the economy, not just for energy, but for our planet at the same time. I believe in science, I believe our climate is changing, and I believe it is a serious threat to our world and our future. And it is a tremendous mistake by this administration, both the president and the governor, to pull back from that approach of embracing renewable energy that will reduce our emissions and create jobs. As to Northern Pass, that's a state issue, but I felt very, very strongly that everyone should be heard. And once they were heard and the site evaluation committee chose not to move forward, I support that decision. As to the pipeline, again, I think we need a voice for the local community, and that's what I've fought for, to give the local community a voice in this process. But let me just say, renewable energy has tremendous potential right here in New Hampshire. We're seeing more and more solar. We're seeing terrific wind projects in places where they're welcome in the community. And most importantly, we're seeing biomass. And I was shocked when the governor tried to veto that bill because biomass creates jobs, it's renewable, and it's a really important source here in New Hampshire. So I want lower costs for energy, more jobs, and we can save the planet.
Thank you. Mr. Negron.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the fundamental basic differences between myself and my opponent. Look, you know, I don't want government telling me in my state, and as a state legislator, that's my responsibility to make sure that we provide whatever those energy resources are within my state. I don't want big government reaching out and telling me what I need to do, what I don't need to do. Look, we're smart folks here in New Hampshire. We've got a great legislature. We've got a great governor, and so we'll decide what's important for us when it comes to energy and energy costs. We're very, very aware of what the costs are, and we're doing some things to make sure that we reduce those costs, specifically in the manufacturing process. But at the end of the day, it's about New Hampshire, it's about us making sure that we understand, and I, as the next congressman, I'm not going to reach out to you and tell you what to do. Now, if you need my help to try and get some things done, that's what I'm there for. I'm at the other end of the line. But it isn't about government telling me what I need to do for energy costs in my state.
As a quick follow-up on that, are the two of you content with the review and feedback process that we have in place right now for these energy projects? Because they have gone through some changes over the last few years while we've debated this issue. Are we in the sweet spot? Do we need to make more changes? Are you content with how we review and judge these projects?
Well, I think we should have more of a local voice, and that's a bill that I've introduced to make sure that we came across this in the pipeline that came across the southern part of my district. And I helped those communities have a voice in that process, and in the end, that pipeline did not happen because it went right through communities, right between schools, across very sensitive lands and rivers. I just think the local community should have a voice in the process. But look, I agree. I think our site evaluation committee should be state-run, and I think that that's a good process.
Mr. Negron?
Absolutely. You know, the first thing you need to do, if you're going to come in somebody's backyard, you better ask them first. You need to reach out to them. You have to include the citizens of this great state. Nobody should come in there and mandate somebody just because they're the 600-pound gorilla in the room. So I think with Northern Pass, my personal opinion is that, you know, we should have reached out to the constituents up there in COAS. I don't think we did a very good job of that. I think what you found out is that, you know, we have a voice. And they stood up for themselves, and, you know, and I'm proud of them. And so anything moving forward, we should be able to make sure that, number one, whoever comes into our state, is that you make sure that you reach out to the constituents because they're the ones that you're supposed to be serving.
Okay, thank you both. Let's go back to Roger for another question. You can direct it to Mr. Negron.
Okay. My next question relates to Medicare. Medicare provides affordable health care for 260,000 Granite Staters and invests in $2.8 billion into the New Hampshire economy. Seniors and people with disabilities are depending on Medicare for affordable health care. What will you do to make sure that Medicare is there to ensure Granite Staters can continue to live with dignity and financial security as they age? Will you oppose legislation that would reduce benefits or shift costs onto consumers such as turning Medicare into a voucher program in which beneficiaries would receive a set amount of money each year for their health care?
Well, I think the number one problem with Medicare is that it's open-ended, right? So we have to have a possibility of having a program that maintains the current benefits that everybody is receiving. And as I said earlier in the opening, but make sure that we look at how we morph this program into something that's sustainable. As I said earlier, if we do nothing, which is always an option, you know, and we start fighting about it, then we know that people out here in this room are going to be hurt by that, by the non-action. So we have to be able to do something. I'm not a big fan of voucher programs, you know, but I am about being fiscally conservative. I am about making sure that we take the right amount of money to give the people that are in this room the right benefit that they have, and I think that's the only way we're going to fix this thing. You got to get people in the room, find out how to keep this thing solvent as we move forward. Otherwise, we're going to be in a world of hurt come 2032.
Thank you. Ms. Kuster.
Again, I have to say the only threat to Medicare and Social Security is the tax break for millionaires and billionaires that added $1.5 trillion to the debt. And then you hear the Republican leadership talking about they're going to cut back on Medicare, they're going to cut back on Social Security, vouchers, privatization, and all of that. So the answer is no. I'm going to fight for Medicare. I'm going to fight for people getting the support that they need. They worked hard to get it. Medicare is a lifeline for people all across this state. When I go out door to door with the Meals on Wheels and I meet people who are in their homes on oxygen, they need Medicare. They don't have any other health care. And I don't know what the Republicans think they're going to do with people that are going to be living in the streets. Of course we need Medicare, and I will fight for it every single day.
Sure. I think it's important to note that when we instituted the Affordable Care Act, the Democrats took out $716 billion from Medicare to fund the ACA. So I would ask you, who's really making sure that we keep Medicare solvent? And as having two parents that have recently passed away, it was very important for them. So it's very near and dear to my heart to make sure that that program is still out there viable for everybody who needs it.
Then we shouldn't threaten it with adding $1.5 trillion to the debt for a tax break for millionaires and billionaires. Look, what we did was provide access to health care. And in New Hampshire, it's really important that the Medicaid expansion happen. My opponent voted against that. But 52,000 people got health care that way that they didn't have before. And we haven't gotten to the opioid crisis. I'm sure we will. But that is the only way that they are getting access to mental health care, to treatment for opioids, and to seniors on Medicaid and Medicare. They would not be able to get by without it.
We have a question on Medicaid coming up in just a minute, so I'll put a pause on that with an opportunity to come back to that one with Roger specifically. But let me go now to Tim with a question now that can be directed to Congresswoman Kuster first.
Congresswoman, the opioid crisis in New Hampshire continues to be a major concern, taking lives, creating significant stressors on local law enforcement, healthcare providers, and numerous social service networks. We've been wrestling with this issue in New Hampshire, and it seems to be worse here than a lot of other places. We've been wrestling with this for quite some time, and maybe some progress is being made, but certainly not enough. So my question is, what do you see as the top one or two strategies that we should be pursuing to address this issue?
Sure, and let me start by saying it's a very complex issue, so there's no silver bullet, and it's probably more than one or two strategies. But I created a bipartisan task force in Congress. We now have 105 members, half Republican, half Democrat, working together. You don't hear about it, it's not sufficiently controversial. But the good news is, in June, we passed 54 bills. It's become part of a package called the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, and it's being sent to the president to sign. We increased the amount of funding coming to New Hampshire, now $30 million this year, because New Hampshire was among the hardest hit, and we fought hard for a formula where we would get more. New Hampshire has some great solutions, and we're going to be part of bringing the rest of the country out of this crisis. Just to cite a few, I'm very proud of the Safe Stations program that we have in Nashua and Manchester. I'm very proud of the programs in Sullivan County and right here in Merrimack County for getting access to mental health and treatment during incarceration. We've increased the access to medication-assisted treatment so that nurse practitioners and physician assistants can help with that, and that'll expand access to treatment. But look, it's a complex issue with a very comprehensive approach. Education, prevention, increasing access to treatment, long-term recovery, because it's not a 28-day one-and-done operation, and then helping law enforcement. And on the last one, fentanyl has been the big threat here, causing the highest number of deaths, and I have legislation that's now passed that's going to increase the resources at our borders for stopping the synthetic opioids coming in from China and elsewhere. So it's comprehensive. I'd be happy to get into more detail, or it's on our website. Thank you.
Ms. Kuster, thank you. Mr. Negron, you please feel free to take 2 minutes. This is an important issue. That was a very substantive answer. I gave her some extra time on that, so
Sure.
please feel free to
No,
expand
absolutely.
if you'd like.
Thank you. And I agree with Congresswoman Kuster. It is complex. But I think the only way you get a handle on these complex issues is to not do it from Washington, but to do it down here and go to these facilities. As a matter of fact, on Monday, I had a discussion with a young individual that has 7 or 8 recovery centers here in our state. And he will tell you, like he told me looking in the eye, it isn't working and we're not winning the war. So it is a very complex issue, but I think it's 3 parts. Number one, from a federal perspective, I think we need to allow and help states, especially in those areas where we have an influx of drugs, to provide the right mechanisms to prevent the drugs from coming into our country to begin with. I mean, that's the first thing that we have to do, and I think we're doing a great job. That's why I think that the ICE agents and the DEA and those folks that are on the point end of the spear are doing the right things to prevent the drugs from coming into the states. That's number one. Number two, it is about the treatment. You know, everybody wants to think that you can treat an opioid addiction with opioids. And I can tell you that I don't subscribe to that model. And I think there's some things that are out there. There's some other drugs that are out there that are showing great promise to be able to do things that are called opioid blockers to prevent somebody from having those issues with the desire to continue, because that's what a drug addiction state is. We're also seeing some things on hemp, that there are things right now. I have a young woman who's a charge nurse at the Mass General Hospital that they're using part of a hemp plant for pain medication that is not dependent inducing, which is a phenomenal thing. But we have to open up our eyes. We have to look at opportunities out there to be able to do things to help these young men and women that get onto this. And the third thing about this thing is I think it's education. You know, I had a discussion, like I said, on Monday. You know, we have to educate kids, because this young man became an addict at 14. At 14. And so we need to make sure that we get in through with the schools, that they understand exactly what it is that they think that they're experimenting with. And these boutique drugs that are coming in are a situation that it's not, you know, a one-time deal. We have one-time people that take the drug and they die from it. So it is absolutely a complex issue, but I think the only way that you get a good handle on it is to come back here, walk the streets, talk to the people, talk to the folks at the fire stations with the safe stations, and those are the ways that you can then bring that information back to Washington and help our state.
Anything more?
Just to say that that's what I've done, is to bring community people together, make sure that they're working in their community together on solutions, and then bringing those people down to Washington to share those solutions with our task force. We've had Ross Cunningham from the Department of Corrections, we've had Brian Rhodes, the fire chief from Nashua, to come down and share these solutions so that we can then spread them across the country.
Final word?
Absolutely, no.
Okay.
Absolutely. We should get the best of breed. Look at Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Arizona, what is using and what's working there, and get the best of breed so that we can tackle this thing as a collective community.
Thank you both for your input on that. Let's go back to Roger with another question. You can direct that to the Congresswoman first.
Okay. This is about Medicaid. Right now, Medicaid helps provide seniors access to long-term services and supports, including services they need to stay in their homes where they want to be. According to an AARP public policy study, home-based services are cost-effective compared to providing nursing home services. What is your position on strengthening Medicaid's role for most vulnerable Americans?
Well, thank you for that. And I have lived through this with my mother, not so much Medicaid, but the idea of keeping someone at home is really important. She had Alzheimer's disease for the last 5 years of her life, and my father was able to keep her at home. And not only is it cheaper, but the quality of care and certainly everyone being engaged and being together is important. I think for Medicaid, people should have the same opportunity. I don't think that we should be warehousing people in nursing homes. I think that we should be providing the supports that people need at home the home health aides, the people that come in with food and nutrition, the people that come in with occupational therapy or physical therapy that you might need. And as you pointed out, that is less expensive to the taxpayer than putting people in nursing homes with 24/7 care. So I believe in it, I'll fight for it, and it's something that's really important. And we've had lots of cuts and people threatening these programs, and I disagree. I think people should stay at their home as long as they can with those supports, and Medicaid should pay.
Mr. Negron.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a different approach, and we'll talk about Medicaid versus in-home care. So Medicaid really is a joint program between the federal government and the state. As a state legislator, we knew that's probably the second or first largest budget line item within the governor's budget. And it really should be that the government allows and gives the money to the state, but then get out. We know what's best for the folks in our constituents in New Hampshire. It really should be a program that is absolutely run by the state. I would actually propose that we look at it as a block grant, that we get X amount of money for the amount of people that we have here, and then we actually manage what it is. Every time the government believes they know what's best for us is when we get in trouble. And so Medicaid sometimes is that one string that they keep on pulling, and we also become so dependent on it. I would tell you that we should get the money from the federal government and say, thank you very little, let us run the program that we see fit, because we absolutely understand that. As in-home care, as my sister who moved from Missouri to take care of my two elderly parents, we absolutely have to look at opportunities for doing that. Yes, it is more cost effective, but it's a quality of life for the individuals that are needing it. My mother and my father, who both died from cancer, were able to then do so with dignity in their home, and it was something that they were very, very comfortable with. So absolutely, we need to look at those things. And those people providing that care, there should be some opportunities for benefits, whether it's a tax deduction or something, because by doing that in home, it reduces the overall care cost of Medicaid.
Kuster.
We haven't talked much about veterans, but one of the recent bills that we passed, the VA Mission Act, that I was involved in a bipartisan way, we had a provision in there for home care providers to be paid wages. And I think that's something to be considered, that home care is very important and we should pay for that. But if it's a family home care provider, I think their contribution should be recognized. And I think that's something that we could do to improve Medicaid. In terms of the block grants, my concern about that is that once you get that set amount of money, it doesn't take into account if more people end up needing that service. And our demographic is growing, is aging in New Hampshire. And I would be concerned with a block grant that we would run out of money and the cuts would impact everyone.
Mr. Negron.
Sure, I would just say I would trust my state government to do the right thing, understanding the demographics the way we do, and understanding that there's ebbs and flows of people that need it. So we do it in almost every other case when it comes to the amount of people in our state. So I wouldn't have any fear about giving my responsibility or giving money to the state and let them manage the program.
We're going to take your questions, audience questions, in just a moment. We have one last question from Roger, and you can direct it first to Mr. Negron.
This is about caregiving. Caregiving, more than 173,000 Granite Staters care for older parents, spouses, children, and adults with disabilities and other loved ones, helping them to live independently in their homes and communities where they want to be. These family caregivers are the backbone of America's care system, yet they continue to face physical, emotional, and financial challenges and deserve better support. If elected, will you work to support this array of family caregivers, and if so, how?
Okay. Thank you. We just touched about it previously. When I used to fly home to Texas and go and help my sister, we had very, very deep discussions about the struggles that she was having. She was she was working full time. She was taking care of both my mother and my father. We had visiting angels that came in. It is a very daunting task to be able to do that, not from just a physical perspective of making sure that she could take my mother and father to appointments and wherever they need. She had to take time off from work. And there should be an opportunity for them to have some sort of break. Look, we asked them, and they do it voluntarily. Nobody tells them to do that. I didn't ask my sister to leave Missouri to go home and take care of our parents. And that's just an isolated incident, you know. And when I would fly home every other month to try to help her in whatever way I could, it really became pretty obvious to me that we have to do something to help those in-care providers. And I'm not talking about the professional ones. I'm talking about family members that take time out of their lives to make sure that they take care of people. Look, you know, it was my mom and my dad. You know, I owe everything to them. And so my sister was just this true champion, and I owe her a debt of gratitude for doing what she did. But we have to find frameworks to be able to help and provide them support.
Ms. Kuster?
Well, again, I've lived it, taking care of my mom with my dad and making sure that I made it over there every day or several times a week and helping him. I can remember she would fall and he would call me in the middle of everything and say, can you come pick her up? And I'd get there, he'd say, don't rush, I'm feeding her dinner on the floor. And she's all propped up in pillows. So I think we do need to do something for caregivers, and particularly if they're foregoing wages to do that job. It's important, and that's why I pointed out we've done that now for veterans, and I think it's really something to be considered. We'll have a good example. We'll be able to get a sense of how that program works, and then it's something that I would very much support expanding. Again, I'm a strong believer in all of these programs: Social Security, Medicare, caregiving, family home caregiving, and professionals coming into the home, because I know we couldn't have done it without it, and I think people deserve that. And it's important in New Hampshire with an aging demographic. We're going to need it.
Roger, Tim, thank you very much for your questions. I now have some of your audience questions. I'll get to as many of them as I can in the dwindling time we have left. I'll just alternate back and forth, but the questions can be for both of you.
It's a big stack.
It is a big stack.
Okay.
We'll do what we can. So maybe we can do 30 to 45 seconds per answer, but I don't want to be too limiting based on each question. So here's the first one from the audience. What will you do to rebuild and add to our infrastructure? Young workers want public transportation to make social, cultural, and professional opportunities more accessible to them, and our current infrastructure is outdated and in a state of disrepair. Mr. Negron?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's not the federal government. You know, you look at the 17 enumerated powers in the Constitution, infrastructure isn't one of them. However, you know, we have to make sure that states like New Hampshire keep the money that they do have so that they can do infrastructure projects. Those are things that are important. You know, it isn't always the government coming in and bailing out. The states need to make sure that that we keep the money in the state of New Hampshire instead of sending it to Washington to do those programs that you're talking about.
Ms. Kuster?
Well, there's a lot we've agreed on. This one we disagree entirely. The interstate highway system is definitely federal, and it wouldn't have happened for interstate commerce without the federal government. So I was incredibly proud to help bring $200 million to complete the I-93 program to New Hampshire. My goal is that for every tax dollar you send to Washington, we get at least $1 back. I'm very excited about the possibility of rail coming to Nashua, and I was shocked when my opponent voted against the study of rail for $4 million study. There are lots of people that commute back and forth. There are lots of people living in New Hampshire with jobs in Boston, and there are plenty of people in Boston, young people that would come up to work here and perhaps live here and stay here in the long run. So we've got aging bridges, we've got aging highways, and I've been very proud of the role I've played in bringing federal funding to New Hampshire, and it's spent by people in New Hampshire who know the bridges and the roads that need help, but it wouldn't get done without that federal funding.
Mr. Negron, final thought.
Sure. On the topic of rail in Nashua, you know, this was the 5th study that they wanted us to provide money for. You know, it's not going to change anybody's mind, and you know, and having somebody like myself who commutes to Massachusetts, you know, it's a two-way train. You know, it would probably be another opportunity for another mechanism for people to leave our state. I would say we need to make sure that the jobs and the industries are here first, make sure that there's a desire and a draw to come to our country, to our state, and then we can look at giving opportunities like rail to come here.
A few seconds to close.
Again, just a big difference. I support rail. Of course, there are people that are taking the rail south. They work in Boston, they live in New Hampshire because they love it here, and we're delighted to have them here. Others will come the other direction, but the point is that it is a tremendous economic engine, and this study is required to get the federal funding going forward to make the rail project happen. And the economic benefits for the entire region are significant, and I think, frankly, it's the boon that we need with an aging population to maintain a strong economy and to grow opportunity going forward.
Next question, I'll start with you, Ms. Kuster, first.
Sure.
Hi. My understanding is that the $700 million cut associated with Obamacare was a reduction in payment to private Medicare C providers. Is that true?
Who brought it up? Do you want to?
Yeah.
Was it to me or to?
It is to both of you, and I can repeat it. My understanding is the $700 million cut associated with Obamacare was a reduction in payment to private Medicare C providers. Is that true?
I don't know the answer to that question. I do know is that when they went and they rated Medicare to be able to then bolster up the ACA, especially when we know how tenuous Medicare is, I think that was irresponsible to do that, regardless of where it was coming from. And so those kind of things, when we're trying to fund another entity that was just starting out with ACA, I thought that was something that the Democrats never should have done, and I think it weakened Medicare to the where we are today.
Thank you. Ms. Kuster.
I just want to say I have voted 53 times not to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and I think, again, a big difference between us. It's not perfect. It needs improvement, but it extended health care to millions of Americans and 52,000 people right here in New Hampshire. I was proud to be a part of bipartisan discussions and a proposal that we put forward to shore up the Affordable Care Act, but I definitely would be concerned about sending a Republican to Congress that would vote to repeal it.
That actually leads to an interesting question that we got. You mentioned bipartisanship, and I'll let you answer this one first, Congresswoman. You are both elected officials. What evidence do you have of bipartisanship? Please name some bills.
Sure. Well, absolutely, and this has been a big goal of mine. I like to say I was born bipartisan, and my entire goal is to bring the New Hampshire approach of bringing people together to get things done. The biggest example is that bipartisan opioid task force that I was the founder and continue to chair. And again, as I said, we passed 54 bills in Congress in 1 week. In June, that was probably more bills than we passed all year. I also work in a very bipartisan way on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I was one of 2 Democrats on this VA Mission Act that's going to expand access to care in New Hampshire by opening up community care and making sure. I worked with a Republican Senator Sullivan from Alaska to make sure that all New Hampshire vets that are eligible for care can get care in the community. I've worked on the Agriculture Committee in a bipartisan way on the Farm Bill that we hope to get passed this year. And the list goes on, but again, you can see it on our webpage of the bipartisan bills that I sponsored and passed.
Thank you. Mr. Negron.
Sure, it's a little more difficult for us, at the state level because some of our bills are so much smaller. But some of the folks that we work with, on some issues, that as long as we make sure that we keep money in our state, reduce costs, I think that was something that both of my Democratic colleagues and I sat between 2 of them, which was great. I learned a lot from some of them too. So I think that's something that you have to go off. We see what's going on in Washington. We see this gridlock that's out there, and and it is we versus they, and we have to break that because when we get to the point where we're currently at in Washington, nobody wins, and the American people suffer.
All right, thank you. Next question. There is a push for extended time off for caring for elderly parents, pregnancy, and illness with pay. But the majority of businesses in New Hampshire are small business that cannot afford to pay multiple people for extended time off with pay. Would you support unemployment being able to be tapped into this for this supportive type of an issue? Congresswoman?
That's an excellent question, and it's very well phrased because that is the conundrum. So I support paid family leave, but I understand that small businesses have a hard time. I remember my niece had to go back to work when her baby was 2 weeks old, and I said, Laura, how are you going to do that? And she said, well, we only have 10 people in our shop, and they can't be out. No, they can't take over my position. Luckily, it was a friendly New Hampshire employer. She could bring the baby, and it all worked out. But I think what we ought to do is use the unemployment process, and instead of considering it a burden on the individual business, we ought to consider it a benefit. Everyone would pay in pennies on the dollar to create the fund that would then cover family and medical leave. And it's because we need this, employers need this, for everyone to be able to participate at their highest and best use. We just had a study come out about wages in New Hampshire. There was over a $10,000 gap between men and women because they can't get the time to care for their family members. And so I think we need to solve this, and I'm very excited about the prospects of solving this in the coming year.
Ms. Negron.
Sure. I'm not in favor of taking some more money, another tax, to fund something else. Look, as I'm a small business owner, I get this better than any study, than anybody that wants to talk about in a room. You know, it is up to me as the owner of my company to make sure that I have the number one asset that I have in my company is my employees. And that's me. That's what I know. And I know that if I have a workforce that know that they're taken care of, that we work things together, you know, I don't have to have restrictions in a law to tell me what's in the best interest of my employees. And so I fight people mandating to me as a business owner what I can and can't do. I think that's up to the person that's writing his name on both sides of the check, on what's important to them. And I don't need a study to tell me that I need to take care of my people, because that's what I do anyway. And so I think it's another thing of government overreach telling me what to do in my business, and I object that wholeheartedly. I mean, I know what's important. I know what makes my company run, and that's what I should be able to do.
Follow up?
And while I have empathy for the business owners, most people are not owning the business, and if they don't have a sister to go to Texas to take care of their parents, they may need some time.
Okay, thank you very much. So this question can go to you, sir, first.
Yes.
While I appreciate you do not have a magic wand, as a recent arrival to Medicare, I am surprised there's no coverage for hearing aids. We seniors wish to be heard and to hear. Thank you, Tim, for that question. Mr. Negron, your response, sir.
Absolutely. And we need to expand to do those kind of things. And I was talking to, I'm going on some veteran roundtables. And for those of you who don't know, I am retired military. I am a veteran. My wife's retired military. My father's retired military. I mean, I understand the veterans' cause probably better than anybody else that's going to be in Congress. Only 79 people in Congress right now that are veterans. But it is about those kind of things that every day to day that we take for granted. You know, some people, if they wanted to go to Lenscraft and get a pair of glasses, they should. If they want to go a hearing aid, they should, you know, they should be able to. You know, again, this is what happens when you have such a bureaucracy that just comes to a grinding halt, because we're fighting at the 30,000-foot level because we want to get an edge over one entity or another, when the person on the ground just needs a pair of glasses or a hearing aid. Why can't we do that? We make things so complicated, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I would do everything to say, if somebody needs to get a hearing aid or glasses or contacts or whatever the case may be, we should be able to allow them to do that.
Thank you, sir. Congresswoman Kuster.
So I think the question was hearing aids on Medicare. Absolutely, I've signed on to legislation for hearing aids and glasses and medical devices that people on Medicare need, and I think it was a gaping hole, and I agree, seniors should be heard and they should hear.
We are unfortunately out of time, given the time constraints for today and the candidate schedule. I'd like to thank both of you for being here, but I'll move now to closing statements. That's a really well-deserved round of applause, and if I can editorialize for a moment, I think these two candidates have shown us that you can have philosophical differences and distinctions without it getting personal, and this is the hallmark of New Hampshire's kinds of conversations. So thank you both for the civility. So now that the group hug is over, we will do closing statements, and again, by the coin flip, Congresswoman Kuster, you may go first. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you to all the audience for your questions. I appreciate the close that way, because one of the things that's on everyone's mind is the bickering that's going on in Congress and how, and in Washington generally. What I'm running for is to restore decency and restore integrity and restore opportunity for all. And I appreciate that Mr. Negron took my commitment and my pledge for decency and integrity in our race. We have distinct differences, and I think over the next few weeks, you'll be able to hear more about them as you did today. I believe in opportunity for everyone in this state, for people who are aged and have wisdom on their side, have a lot to offer to our community, but may need support from Medicare and Social Security, for people who are taking care of their loved ones, whether it's Alzheimer's disease or a brand new baby. I've lived through this on both ends. For people who have served our country, and we need to serve them, and we can do better, and we will. And I'm very excited about some of the opportunities that are coming our way in New Hampshire. And for our young people who are suffering under this opioid epidemic, the number of children that are living with grandparents, the number of children that are living in homes where there's tremendous stress. If you talk to any teacher in this state right now, this is first and foremost in their minds. How are we going to care for the children? So these are the issues that I fight on every single day, that I'm working on, that I believe in, and I take my lived experience as a mom with a job and 2 children, trying to get to childcare, trying to make sure that they have a good opportunity. As a daughter, taking care of my mother with my dad and making sure that she was safe and that she would be comfortable and age with dignity. But we need to restore decency. We need to bring people together to get the job done. And I'm very excited about the record that I have and the work that we have left to do. I ask for your vote on November 6th. I appreciate you being with us today, and I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much again for coming out, and for Congresswoman Kuster, thank you.
I didn't need to go behind
Hey, that's
the podium.
okay. Look, since 1979, I've been answering the call in both public and private service. That's who I am. That's all I've ever done. I've been a servant, whether it was when I was in the military, or with my company right now that does work for the Department of Defense, or on many different cases. You know, this campaign is always about fighting for New Hampshire families and freedoms. That's what it's about. It's about restoring American confidence. It's about understanding fundamentally what it is that your voice needs to be heard and then repeated and carried in Washington. You know, my father was in the military, and we traveled all over the world, and we visited many, many different places. And this state is the quintessential state to start and raise a family, which is why we did. You know, being a father of 3, I can tell you that I had one of the greatest opportunities is after 9/11, my wife was activated, and she was gone. And I raised 3 children on my own. And I have a perspective that most males don't. And I understand how hard it is. So I'm able to balance what that is. And you know what? It's about making sure that you have options, that you're able to go do the things that you want to do. And it's about bringing a voice of civility. It's about understanding what it is that we, every day, those New Hampshire families on Sundays when they're trying to balance a checkbook, as I said earlier, the gazintas and the gazadas, you know, and it's a struggle. And we've lived that struggle. As a business owner, you know, we do some things to make sure that the company keeps on going that we do without. So I understand the perspective of what it is to make something from nothing and to move it forward. And I think Washington is there to serve you. It's not you to serve them. And it's about us being temporary employees for you. We work for you. And so my perspective, you know, I'm not a professional politician. I love what I do. This is great, and I think we should be able to have people in Washington to do that. But here's what I tell you, folks. Over the next couple of weeks, you'll see that we're fighting for you guys, that I bring a different perspective, that I bring a perspective of a guy that's all he's done is served his whole life. And I want to continue to do that. So thank you very much. God bless you, and let's eat lunch.
I don't know if I could come up with a better finish than that. Steve, Annie, thank you both very much. And please note, on behalf of AARP and the Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce, we thank you very much for being here. 1 week from today, the show goes on the road. We'll be having a similar forum at St. Anselm College next Thursday between Chris Pappas and Eddie Edwards. So we look forward to that. Thank you again for your time. Thank you for your service. And again, as Steve just said, lunch is served. Buffet lunch out in the hall. Thank you.